Before the World War One, the women didn't have very many rights. When the war started, the need of the nation to work as a group was key. All of the women during the war were sent to do the man's job while he was off at war. When the war ended, the soldiers came back to take their jobs back, which meant the job loss for the women. And Alvin York was a distinguished U.S. soldier, leads a group of 16 soldiers on an attack of German machine gun nests while trapped behind enemy lines. Charged a machine gun nest with only a pistol, awarded the CMH. In the 20s, girls were called flappers because they had boobette hair, smoked, and drank with short skirts. The woman could now vote in elections. People had more money, therefore they could get more consumer goods like clothes, appliances, refrigerators, and radios. Radios became wildly popular. The first station was Pittsburgh's KDKA. 3 years later, the first radio station was created. There were more than 500 stations. It is estimated that over 12 million households had a radio. After World War One, the people had good economic and social views. For example, the stock market was doing great, people had booming businesses, and there were new jobs being created. Also, socially, the people showed little interest in the social movements or politics. Plus, women were starting to make initiative and doing men's jobs like working at factories and producing trucks. Also, during this time, the white folks allowed African American women to work as elevator operators and other assisting jobs. Franklin D. Roosevelt came up with a new concept which we know as the New Deal. The New Deal was in Roosevelt's presidential nomination speech. He said to the people, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. He used this line to help get the people to vote for him since they were in such a deficit state from going through the Great Depression. The New Deal's intentions were to help the unemployed folks, help the people who were going to or have already lost their farms, and reform what has already been taken away from the people. It was also helping to get the banks and businesses back up and rolling because people invested a lot of money into banks and their businesses, and when they lost all their hope. The people were very hopeful for this deal and were willing to do anything to get themselves out of the Great Depression. Roosevelt did end up winning the election against Hoover, for which he was the former president who was blamed for on the causes of the Great Depression. World War II began in 1939 and lasted until 1945. This war kicked everybody in overdrive, so to say. People banded together to make this country win. A lot of people worked hard and women worked in factories while men went and fought. During this time, it is obvious that socially people were upset because of the fact of some of the soldiers who went over the war never came home and were severely injured, which upset the people's families. But economically, after the war was over, it helped the U.S. become rich. This war helped end the Great Depression. Plus, the women during this time had to do more than men's job because a lot of the men had to go fight. Even though when some of the men came back, the women had to give up their jobs for the men, but it helped the thought of the woman only being housewife become less of an image for them. Politically, during the war, African Americans were allowed to serve, so this helped later down the road with the civil rights movement. The Cold War began in 1945 and ended in 1963. Spy cases frantic people and they become more on edge. Sputnik was sent out into space and was the first human intervention with space. The Cold War cost America a lot of money. It also helped with jobs to create for income for families. The Civil Rights Movement occurred from 1954 to 1968. It was the social movements in the United States whose goals were to end racial segregation and discrimination against the blacks. This impacted life for America because when the movement occurred, this forced equality for all, which didn't go over well with everyone. For example, younger, educated white people were more understanding and willing for the civil rights movement, On the other hand, the older, uneducated white folks were not okay with it. The older people were used to the segregation and thought that it was right, and that's how they grew up, and they didn't really want to change their views. The Vietnam War took place during the time frame of November 1955 to April 1975. The Vietnam War was also known as the Resistance War against America. During the long, bloody, and hard 20 years of this war, it had taken over 2 million lives, and over 3 million were wounded. The war destroyed both North and South Vietnam. The U.S. dropped over 8 million tons of bombs on Vietnam. During this war, the Watergate scandal occurred, which weakened the American people's faith and confidence in their government. The counterculture, which is also known as like the hippie era, was whenever people were becoming aware of the realities of life and having to defend their home. The people that were back home were revolting everything about Vietnam because they didn't feel like it was right. All they wanted was the soldiers to be back home.